Hello, everybody. I don't know why my screen is a little dark, but that's okay. I am making this video as promised, just following up on the presentation for Chapter 6. I know in class we spent a little bit of time going over all of the skills because they're very, very important. So I wanted to make a video just going over the last few. And so if you guys have the PowerPoint open, I want you guys to be looking at slide 20, and that is rehearsal. And so I think we were briefly touching this topic when I realized that we were really over time by like 10 minutes. And so what you guys need to know about rehearsal is that it requires clients to verbalize or act out what they're going to go do, what they decide to do. It's a way that they can sort of familiarize themselves with the sensation of what a challenging task is going to be like. And then it also, what we would classify as covert, because that's overt. That's me doing something, saying something, overt behavior. Covert rehearsal is more internal. I'm imagining, I'm reflecting on my desired goal. And then I usually have this as a form of homework. So rehearsal is really helpful if a client is experiencing some type of anxiety around a topic, if they are nervous about a certain interaction they're going to have. So we can do overt rehearsal and covert rehearsal to ease that anxiety and to make it more manageable. Then we transition to one of my favorite topics and a very, very important one, the idea of transference and countertransference. So the first thing you guys need to know about the difference between one or the other is that it's coming from two different parties. Transference always starts with the client. And so in therapy, it's all about the client. So that's the way you can remember it. The client is number one. And so transference, the number one, the first topic when you say transference and countertransference, transference comes from the client, and it is any type of feeling, attitude, desire towards the therapist. It comes from the client to the therapist, right? And it can be like any direction. It can be a positive feeling, a negative feeling. It can be desires of intimacy. It can be desires of hatred. It could be unconscious. It could be conscious. It could be overt. It could be covert. Transference is considered a natural part of the therapeutic process. And it is the therapist's job to understand how to identify it, how to address it in a safe and non-judgmental way, and how to manage it within the ethical code that we exist by as counselors. And so countertransference, okay, because we're human as well in the counseling space, is any emotion that is projected towards the client. Okay, so countertransference comes from the counselor, okay, not the client. And an easy way to think about it is countertransference starts with COUN, and counselor starts with COUN as well. And so that is the counselor's projected emotions or emotional reactions towards the behavior of the client. And it can be a feeling, like I said, it could be relating to the client's experience and projecting their belief of how the client should feel onto the client, even though the client may not be feeling that way, such as perhaps you as the counselor have experienced a loss of a loved one. Perhaps you lost a parent. Well, maybe you're working with a client who's also lost a parent, but they had a bit of a more complex relationship with the parent. And so in this stage of grief, they may not be feeling sad, whereas at that stage, when you were in your grief, you were very sad. So we would not want to project that onto the client. However, again, countertransference is largely unconscious, and it's important to bring our unconscious into conscious awareness to have that insight to know how to manage it. And it can also be having feelings of intimacy, sexual desire, towards the client as well, even feelings of wanting to be a friendship, wanting to have a friendship or give advice. And I want to just say countertransference in and of itself is not a bad thing. It is all about how the counselor chooses to manage it and how they choose to maintain managing it, because we're people and we work with people. And there's going to be some clients that we work with who bring up things within us, who remind us of our past, who remind us of current people in our life. And so it's important to know how to manage that. This is bothering me. I'm going to shut this. Okay, that's better. Okay, so that is all about transference and countertransference. So now we shift to termination, an area that can be really challenging, especially starting off as a counselor, because it can feel like a failure. Termination sounds like a scary word. However, it's an extremely normal and important part of the counseling process in many, many cases. So even if you're working as a long-term therapist in a private practice setting and you're working with people for years on end, you still may have to go through this from time to time. And what's important to know, there are positive aspects of it. It helps break up counseling into more of a process experience. It is a relational experience, yes, yet there is a set start date. And in some cases, there's a set end date. For example, if you're working for some type of nonprofit or clinic or agency or hospital in which you know the client's not going to stay there forever. So it gives you structure in a way that doing a private practice model may not. And that can lend itself more effectively towards theories such as solution focused, cognitive behavioral therapy, even different types of DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, because those theories tend to be a bit more structured and actually have like modules to follow and activities to do versus being person-centered, attachment-based, and so on. And so closing the therapeutic relationship means the maintaining of change. So it's giving the client permission to move forward in their life and their healing journey in a whole new way, to take what you guys have practiced and learned and healed from together into the big, big world. And then lastly, it serves as a reminder that the client has matured. So no matter what situation you're in, when you have a client terminating, you always need to take at least one session. I like to do 3 to 4 potentially, just processing what it means to transition from therapy to no therapy, and to highlight progress and to be strength-based and to reflect your experience as a therapist with them. I think this is also a time where healthy self-disclosure can be really, really effective for the therapeutic relationship, as always, for the client's benefit. And then the time of closing is really important. You don't just want to randomly spring it on your client. I believe most of the time the closing of the therapeutic relationship needs to come from the client rather than the therapist. If it's sort of like an amorphous thing, meaning there's not a set time, but you guys set it together. Some clients will want that. Some will request having a start and end date. And some prefer to fade, right? So it's like the slow fade. That is, instead of having an hour sessions or 55-minute sessions or 50 minutes, whatever the model is, you start moving it to like, once a week for 40 minutes, and then once a week for 30 minutes, and then maybe once every 2 weeks for 30 minutes, and then once a month. And you can see how it works its way down from there. And there can be a lot of resistance from both ends, remember, of the counselor and the client. That transference and countertransference, it can feel like a breakup. It can feel like abandonment. And that is one thing we do not want to have associated with the termination phase of the counseling relationship, is abandonment. Client abandonment is real. It is terrible. It is, in my opinion, one of the most unethical things that a therapist can do towards a client, which is just abandoning them and not giving space to process or transition. And so that can be really, really damaging. So it's important to explore this. And that's why I like to give it at least 3 to 4 sessions potentially based on the circumstance, to process the closing with the client. And there can be like new challenges develop within this season. This can bring about a lot of feelings of abandonment, which is different than actually abandoning your client, to process with your client on. So we want to make sure that we don't premature terminate because that could, as we said earlier, lead to feelings of abandonment that are actually abandonment. So when you're deciding or the client brings up termination, it's important to keep a few things in mind, such as appointments. How often have they been? Is this marked progress that you can note? How's the therapeutic rapport? Do they need to find a therapist they connect with more? That would make sense if they wanted to terminate with you, to try other counselors. Your orientation comes into effect. For the attachment-based counselor, I've been working for 3 years on my own so far, and I have not decided to terminate with anybody. However, I guess that if I did follow that model, termination could be a possibility if the client has firmly developed a secure base in session and has now started to cultivate that within the world around them, to where coming to see me is more of like a check-in versus healing. I think that even checking in can still be healing. So if anything, I have clients that go monthly, and some quarterly. And that's really cool experience to have as well, because that's the maintenance phase. And then last but not least, it's important to end, like we said, on a positive note. We want to express to the client how much they've improved and made progress, and really just support them in their new transition. So hope this video was helpful.
Hi, COUN.